Hey, how's it going? This is Dave DeSantis, the CEO and founder of CherryPickPrices.com. The purpose for this presentation is to kind of start unraveling the mysteries of par levels. People have a lot of questions when setting up par levels in the software because it's not something that people think about every day, actually, because honestly, very few restaurants are setting up inventory. So before you tackle par levels in the Cherry software, please take a look at this presentation, and then if you have any questions about your setup, make sure that you get in touch with us. Now, there are basically three things that I like people to think about when they're setting up par levels. The first is with the items. Do I want to estimate, or is this a product that I need to be exact on while I'm counting? What's the value of my time versus the value of the cost of the product that we're looking at, that we're counting, that we're ordering? This is going to definitely impact the measurement unit that you decide to choose when counting the product and setting up par levels. And the last thing I want you to think about when you're looking at each item setting up par levels is, do I use a little of this product or do I use a lot? Because that's also going to impact the measurement unit that we set up to use to count each item and the ease at which you get through an inventory count. Now I'm going to show you an example of the Cherry order sheet because lots of times this brings some clarity to questions people have with par levels. And the first example that I'm going to show you is an example of a very, very high volume pizzeria. And it's more important for this company to estimate than to be exact, and he has set his par levels up to use the measurements mostly by supplier delivery unit, or SDU. And you can see there's a lot of fractional counting. So for example, instead of counting bottles of barbecue sauce, they're stocking several cases, so it's easier for him to just say, I have one case or I have a half case, because in their storage they actually are keeping things like the bottles in the cases because they're stacking stuff on the shelves all over the place in this crazy, insane pizzeria. But you'll also see things like Parmesan cheese. He's not ordering it by the pound or counting it by the pound. It's faster and easier for him to just count things by cases. And prior to using Cherry, they weren't doing any inventory at all. So if you're stocking $12,000 or more worth of inventory on your shelves and you weren't counting it, and we've put a method that can get you within a few $100s of that number, and you can do it quickly. He can actually do his inventory in under 25 minutes. Then that's good enough. So you'll see everything on this example, everything's set up by the case. And here's a good example, his containers. Whenever he gets below 0.25 cases, he wants to trigger the ordering of a replenishment case. However, on heavier use items, like look at this, his 16-inch boxes he's going through, he has a par level of 26 bundles. So it doesn't make sense for this guy to start counting boxes. Now here is a completely different order guide, and you'll see that this client took a much different approach to their setup. Obviously, counting things by the pound was more important to this person, and their movement on items, although heavy still, is significantly less than that other high volume pizzeria. So this person is getting out the scale, and you can see that they've chosen LCU measurements like pound instead of case for a lot of the items that they're counting. However, they've still made use of SDU when it's applicable, like here on the onions. Why is he going to get out a scale for a $13 50-pound bag of onions when he can look at it and just say, I've got a quarter bag, and that's good enough. Now, the next thing that I want to do here is take you through just a few items and just kind of give you an idea of the way that Cherry is thinking as you're setting up inventory. So think about how many different ways you can count the item that you see here on the screen, French fries. It's a pretty consistent product. It's packaged similarly from supplier to supplier and manufacturer to manufacturer. So, I mean, if you wanted, you could count it by the case. And if you were in a situation where you were a restaurant that used 20 or 30 cases of French fries a week, then this is obviously going to be the best way for you to count it. You're not unpacking bags out of the cases if you're using 30 cases of French fries at a time. But if you are a slower moving restaurant and maybe you're buying 4 or 5 cases of French fries and unpacking them into some type of a chest freezer, it might make sense for you to set the par levels up and count the product by the bag. You can do that because it's a consistent item and it's a consistent measuring unit from the different suppliers that you're going to be purchasing the product from. And that matters when you're determining the par level unit that you're going to use to set up items in Cherry. The par level unit has to be the same, and it has to be available from every single one of the suppliers that you buy the product from. Now, if you're a slower moving unit, you might decide to set this up by the pound. And what I mean by that is, do you sell a case of French fries or less a week? And in that situation, you might want to be saying, okay, I want my par level to be, if I get to 20 pounds, I trigger ordering another case of French fries. Now, our business, whether it was one of our busier pizzerias, I owned 12 different pizzerias, or I start to lose count actually, so somewhere around there. And we've had busier ones and we've had slower ones. But no matter how busy they were or how slow they were, we could usually handle wiping all the butts that came through each location with 1 case of toilet paper or less. So you could set a par level up on a product like this if you wanted to say, when I get to a quarter case, I'd like to trigger another case to be delivered. If you happen to have a restaurant that seats and sees hundreds and hundreds or thousands of people a week, maybe you're going through 6 cases of toilet paper, and it might make sense to count the par level by the case. Sheets, I'm pretty sure that none of us are doing it by the sheet, but I figured I'd throw it on there so that you could see a case of the ridiculous. Let's face it, there's certain things in the restaurant that we're just not counting. Even if you had an inventory system that didn't allow you to estimate items by the case, you're still never going to count the forks within a case of disposable cutlery. It just doesn't make sense to spend that kind of time compared to the value of the cost of the product. So there are definitely times when we're purchasing in our restaurants where we're dealing with imperfect information from the suppliers. And it's really not possible, if you think about, for them to give us exact weights on things like whole muscle meats, in a lot of situations, different dairy items. And they'll provide us things by average weight. And average weight is not a big deal with Cherry, because Cherry just basically considers an average weight like it's the actual weight. And what happens is Cherry has a receiving feature that with items like cheese, if you're using average weights for ordering, you know that when the boxes come in, they have the actual weight that you're paying, because in most situations you're actually seeing pricing for these items by the pound. So Cherry has the ability to take the pricing by the pound and the average weight and create a cost per case. And it's pretty cool stuff. You'll see it in the use of Cherry, rather than get into too much detail in the video that we're making now. But one thing that I want you to understand is, if you're setting up the par level here, you can do it by the case, you can do it by the loaf, you can do it by the pound. I wouldn't recommend doing it by the ounce. That would be a whole heck of a lot of counting. And once again, it really depends on what you're comfortable with and how close an eye you want to keep on the individual product. And I know in a pizza shop, a lot of people do like to break out the scale on the cheese. Now, believe it or not, pan spray is probably one of the toughest items to deal with in setting up the software. And that's because people naturally want to count this product by the can. It's available by the case. It's pretty standardized that most companies have a 6-can case. But the problem with counting this item by the can has to do with the fact that not all the cans are actually created equal. Some have a 14-ounce can, some might have a 17, 21-ounce cans. It just comes different ways. So the cool thing is, because you probably don't care if you get 6 cans of 14-ounce or 6 cans of 17-ounce, you could set this up to have a par level by the case measurement, and say you put in that you want to trigger a replenishment case when you get to a third of a case or less. So you could put in a par level of 0.33, and if you tell Cherry that you have 0.33 of a case or 2 cans, you're going to get another case. Now, in that situation, the LCU that you use in the setup of the line item for pan spray will not be can. It's going to be ounce, because you want to order it by the case. You really don't care which can you get, but it does make a difference significantly in the price. So you want Cherry to price this by looking at an LCU of ounce, and then it will look at the total number of ounces in the case and come up with a price per case. And it will order you by the case by saying, I have 0.25 cases of pan spray, and it's going to trigger another delivery of a whole case. So I know that probably gets a little bit confusing, but if you think about it for a few minutes, I think that it is common sense. And if it's not common sense, we are here to help, and we love to help people. And we can quickly share a screen with you and show you the answer to pretty much any of your questions. So you know how to contact us, I'm sure of, at this point. And I will leave you with have a cherry day.